I uncovered every secret from the last 30 years.
And I have given all the proofs of who was involved with Diddy. I have presented the videotape of Diddy's parties as evidence. Now no one can save Diddy and the other celebs. Jay-Z, after watching the rest of the documentary, you'll understand everything.
Stop scrolling because this just went from messy to nuclear. 50 Cent is back, and part 2 of his Diddy Netflix documentary isn't just spilling tea. It's flipping the whole table. If you thought part 1 was wild, buckle up because this chapter reportedly digs deeper into the power plays, the whispers behind closed doors, and the names nobody thought would be pulled into the spotlight. And yes, Jay's name is now in the conversation. Sources claim 50 isn't holding back this time. We're talking old alliances, alleged backroom deals, industry favors, and a timeline that suddenly starts looking real funny. The doc teases never-before-seen interviews, resurfaced footage, and connect-the-dots moments that have fans asking one question: how much did we really not know? Social media is already on fire. Some are calling it a long-overdue reckoning. Others say it's pure chaos designed to blow up legends. Either way, 50 Cent's message is clear. This isn't entertainment, it's exposure. And whether you believe every claim or not, the impact is undeniable. The culture is watching, the industry is sweating, and the comments are divided straight down the middle. So before anyone rushes to defend, deny, or delete, watch closely. Because if part 2 delivers what it promises, this could change how we look at hip-hop power forever. What happens when one of hip-hop's most calculated villains decides he's done playing nice? You get this. 50 Cent didn't just release part 2 of his Diddy Netflix documentary, he reignited a cultural firestorm that's been quietly smoldering for years. And if part 1 cracked the door open, part 2 allegedly kicks it off the hinges and starts naming names that fans never expected to hear in the same sentence for decades. Sean Diddy Combs has been painted as untouchable, a mogul, a kingmaker, the man who turned parties into power and connections into currency. But 50 Cent's documentary series doesn't treat Diddy like a legend, it treats him like a case study. According to the framing of the project, this isn't about gossip. It's about patterns, influence, and what happens when power goes unchecked behind the velvet ropes of fame. Part 1 set the stage by revisiting Diddy's rise, the bad boy era, the glossy magazine covers, the myth-making. It highlighted how Diddy didn't just build artists, he built systems. Systems where loyalty was rewarded, silence was expected, and access came at a price. None of this was brand new information, but the way it was stitched together made people uncomfortable. Interviews were cut tight. Old footage was replayed with new context. And 50's narration cold, sarcastic. Surgical made it clear this was personal. Now here's where part 2 reportedly escalates everything, according to early reactions. The second installment zooms out from Diddy alone and starts examining the ecosystem around him. The documentary suggests that no mogul survives at that level without partnerships, mutual protection, and strategic alliances. And this is where Jay-Z's name enters the conversation, not as a cartoon villain, but as a symbol of how power circulates at the top of the industry. To be clear, the documentary reportedly leans heavily on implication rather than direct accusation, timelines, shared business moves, moments where interests aligned a little too perfectly. The message isn't here's a crime, but rather here's a network. And that distinction matters because it allows 50 Cent to ask questions without answering them outright. One segment that has fans buzzing allegedly focuses on how certain artists' careers stalled, while others skyrocketed overnight. The doc lines up contract disputes, sudden label changes, and public fallouts, then lets viewers draw their own conclusions. Industry insiders interviewed, faces shadowed, voices altered, describe an unspoken rule, cross the wrong people, and doors close quietly. No blacklist announcement. Just radio silence. 50 Cent positions himself as someone who survived because he refused to play along. He recounts being warned subtly, then not so subtly, to fall in line, to stop asking questions, to stop poking bears. Instead, he doubled down. And this documentary, in his telling, is the long game finally paying off. Another explosive portion reportedly revisits old public moments that were once brushed off as industry drama, award show snubs, sudden beefs that seemed to come out of nowhere, media narratives that flipped overnight. The documentary reframes these incidents as chess moves, not chaos. If true, it paints a picture of an industry where perception is controlled as carefully as contracts. And then there's the footage. Fans say Part 2 includes resurfaced clips that hit differently in 2026 than they did when they first aired. Jokes that don't land anymore. Interviews where body language says more than words. Parties that look less like celebrations and more like auditions for acceptance into an inner circle. Again, nothing is outright stated, but the implication is heavy. Jay-Z's inclusion, according to the doc's structure, isn't about scandal, it's about contrast. Two moguls, two approaches, two images of success. The film reportedly asks whether these men competed, collaborated, or quietly benefited from the same broken systems. And that question alone was enough to set social media on fire. Of course, critics are already calling foul. They argue that 50 Cent has personal grudges, that controversy equals clicks, and that documentaries can be edited to tell whatever story the creator wants. And that's a fair point. But supporters counter with one simple fact. Too many stories from too many different people keep lining up the same way. What makes this documentary hit harder is timing. The culture is different now. Audiences are less willing to excuse bad behavior because of hits, money, or nostalgia. The separate the art from the artist's defense doesn't land like it used to. And 50 Cent knows that. This project doesn't feel rushed, it feels strategic by the end of Part 1's extended breakdown. The message is clear. This isn't about destroying idols for sport. It's about challenging the idea that success at the highest level is always clean, that nobody noticed, that nobody knew. The documentary doesn't claim to have all the answers, but it insists the questions can't be ignored anymore. And that's what really scares people. Not lawsuits, not headlines, but the possibility that fans start re-examining everything they were told, that they stop laughing off old rumors, that they start asking who benefited, who paid the price, and who's been protected all along. With Part 2 now out in the wild, one thing is undeniable. 50 Cent didn't come to entertain, he came to disrupt. And whether this documentary ends in vindication, backlash, or total chaos, the industry has officially lost the luxury of pretending everything is fine. Because once the curtain gets pulled back even a little, it's impossible to unsee what's behind it. If Part 1 of 50 Cent's Diddy Netflix documentary was about setting the chessboard, Part 2 is where the first real pieces get knocked over. This is the chapter where whispers turn into patterns, where coincidence starts happening a little too often, and where the documentary leans fully into the idea that hip-hop's biggest empires weren't built in isolation, they were built through silent agreements, shared interests, and strategic silence. Part 2 reportedly opens with a blunt question. How does someone stay powerful for decades in an industry built on beef, ego, and constant turnover? The answer the documentary suggests isn't just talent or hustle, it's control. Control of narratives, control of access, control of who gets amplified and who quietly disappears. This section dives deeper into Diddy's influence beyond music, fashion, spirits, media, reality TV. The documentary lays out how diversification didn't just make Diddy richer, it made him harder to challenge. Artists weren't just dealing with a label head anymore. They were dealing with a man whose reach extended into sponsorships, endorsements, and mainstream visibility. Crossing him, the doc implies, didn't just affect your music career, affected your entire livelihood. One of the most talked about segments focuses on artists who allegedly tried to speak up or break free. The documentary doesn't rely on a single voice. Instead, it layers multiple accounts, some public, some anonymous, describing eerily similar experiences. contracts that suddenly became airtight, promised releases that never dropped, calls that stopped being returned. No dramatic confrontation, just a slow, quiet erasure. 50 Cent's narration cuts through these stories with barely concealed contempt. He frames himself not as a hero, but as an anomaly, someone who made enough money and noise early on that he couldn't be fully controlled. According to him, most artists don't get that luxury. They're dependent, and dependency in this system equals obedience. This is where Jay-Z's shadow looms larger. Part 2 reportedly explores how multiple moguls can coexist at the top without open warfare. The documentary suggests that competition doesn't always mean conflicts, sometimes it means coordination. Shared platforms, overlapping business interests, mutual benefit. Again, there are no direct allegations, but the editing does heavy lifting. Timelines overlap. Deals mirror each other. Public rivalries conveniently cool right when major expansions happen. A particularly tense moment in the film reportedly revisits old industry summits and exclusive events rooms most fans never see. Former insiders describe these spaces as where real decisions are made. Not on Instagram, not in diss tracks, but in private, where money talks louder than bars. The documentary implies that once you're inside those rooms, protecting the system becomes more important than exposing it. Social media's reaction to this part has been explosive. Clips from the documentary are being dissected frame by frame. Old interviews are resurfacing with captions like, "How did we miss this?" Fans are connecting dots in real time, sometimes reaching conclusions faster than the documentary itself ever states. And that may be the most dangerous element of all. 50 Cent doesn't have to accuse anyone directly when the audience is doing it for him. Part 2 also examines media complicity. Who decides which stories go viral and which die quietly? The documentary suggests that certain outlets benefited from access and advertising dollars, making them less likely to push narratives that threaten powerful figures. Negative stories, according to insiders, were often softened, delayed, or buried altogether. One chilling segment reportedly focuses on how humor was used as camouflage. Jokes in interviews? Laughing things off on late-night shows. Turning uncomfortable rumors into punchlines before they could harden into accusations. The documentary argues that when the culture laughs, it stops asking questions, and that laughter has protected more than a few careers. As the episode moves toward its final act, the tone shifts from expose to warning. 50 Cent makes it clear this documentary isn't about the past alone. It's about what's still happening now. About young artists signing deals without understanding the leverage stacked against them. About fans unknowingly supporting systems that chew people up behind the scenes. By the end of Part 2, the viewer isn't left with a clean villain or a neat conclusion. Instead, they're left with discomfort, doubt, and a growing sense that the hip-hop industry's biggest success stories may also be its most carefully curated illusions. And that's the real power of this documentary. Not that it tells you what to think, but that once you've seen it, you can't stop thinking about it. If Part 2 was about revealing the hidden mechanics, Part 3 is where the fallout hits hardest. This section reportedly focuses less on history and more on consequences, how influence, loyalty, and secrecy ripple through hip-hop today. And if Part 2 made fans uncomfortable, Part 3 leaves them outright unsettled. The documentary reportedly opens with a series of modern-day examples. Artists whose careers exploded seemingly overnight. Others who vanished without explanation, and collaborations that seemed too strategic to be coincidence. Each story is framed to highlight one core idea behind every public success. There's a complex web of unspoken agreements, favors, and quiet enforcement. According to 50 Cent, this system isn't evil, it's just survival at the highest level. But for those caught on the outside, it can feel ruthless. Part 3 also doubles down on the personalities involved. Diddy isn't just examined as a mogul, he's dissected as a strategist, a negotiator, and a master of perception. Jay-Z again is presented as a peer, sometimes a rival. Sometimes a shadow, a nihilist trading how even icons aren't immune to the rules of the game. 50 Cent reportedly contrasts his own trajectory against theirs, highlighting moments where he refused to conform and paid the price, or, in some cases, where he thrived because he did. The doc doesn't shy away from the human cost. Several anonymous sources reportedly describe the anxiety of navigating this ecosystem. Artists afraid to speak, executives careful not to offend, media teams juggling loyalty and access. The narrative emphasizes that while fans see albums, tours, and awards, what goes on behind the scenes is another world entirely, a world governed as much by fear and negotiation as by talent or ambition. One of the most talked about moments in Part 3 allegedly revisits specific incidents where influence allegedly shaped public perception. Social media campaigns, subtle media pushes, and carefully curated appearances all contributed to the image of untouchable power. And yet, the documentary frames this not as villainy alone, but as a system anyone trying to succeed had to learn to navigate or get crushed by the end. The tone becomes almost cautionary. 50 Cent seems to be saying, know the game before you play it. Understand the networks. Recognize the power structures. And don't assume that what you see on stage, in interviews, or on social media reflects reality. The implication is clear. Entertainment and exposure are just the tip of the iceberg. The real story happens in shadows few can enter. As the credits roll, viewers are left with lingering questions rather than answers. Did 50 Cent expose Diddy? Or did he simply expose the system? How much of Jay-Z's involvement is complicity versus coincidence? And ultimately, how many more artists and moguls are playing by the same rules behind closed doors? Part 3 closes with a subtle but powerful reminder in hip-hop. Power isn't just about hits, money, or fame, it's about control. And control, as 50 Cent's documentary suggests, doesn't always come with a spotlight. By the time you finish watching, it's impossible to ignore the message. In the game of influence, everyone is a player or a pawn. And 50 Cent made it his mission to show exactly which is which. All right? Now that you've seen how deep this goes, it's time to decide where you stand. 50 Cent's Netflix documentary didn't just revisit old headlines, reframed them, exposed hidden dynamics, and challenged everything we thought we knew about Diddy, Jay-Z, and the inner workings of hip-hop power. And whether you agree with his take or think it's all drama, one thing is clear. This conversation isn't over. If you're ready to join the debate, don't stay silent. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think really pulls the strings? Were Diddy and Jay-Z victims of circumstance, masters of the system, or something in between? And most importantly, do you believe 50 Cent's narrative, or do you see it as a vendetta disguised as a documentary? Hit that like button if you're here for the truth behind the industry. Share this video to get your friends talking. And make sure to subscribe with notifications on, because this saga isn't ending with Part 2. The fallout, reactions, and next moves are coming fast, and you don't want to miss a single moment. Stay tuned, stay loud, and get ready, because in this world, the truth always finds a way to the surface.